No problem. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Nick. I'm from Eskom. There's been a lot of conversations earlier about us, but we're not load shedding, so I suppose that is a plus, right?
Those were not conversations, those were insults.
Oh, no, was it?
Yeah,
Okay.
Can we help you with the translation?
Okay, so I head up the Smart Grid Center of Excellence at Eskom. So we do research and development into next horizon technologies and prepare our line divisions for it. So obviously you can imagine that fuel cell vehicles, new energy vehicles are going to have a prominent place in this future, especially impact on our grid. Well, be it electric or fuel cell, we can discuss that. And we have two of our colleagues that's going to be joining us remotely. We've got Toby and Bernard, who's online. And I'd like to introduce the rest of my panel, starting from extreme left. That's Anton. Anton's from Toyota, okay, in terms of new business development. We have Jacob. Jacob's from Mackenzie. And he's going to be talking to us about some numbers and facts about the topic on hand. And online we have, I just want to get the names right before I stuff this up. It's Bernard, who's the Senior Vice President of Umicore.
He's going to say it's Bernhard.
Bernard, okay. And we have, who's left? Toby Green from BASF. Okay, so I think with that being said, I just want to set the scene. So it's the outlook of ICE and BEVs in this with regard to PGMs. I think I want to take a step back and say why I'm here. So from this perspective, from an energy perspective, I think we're discussing electrification. So it's not electrification of households per se, but it's the role of electrifications, electric vehicles, what place it's going to play in our industry. We're going to have vehicle to grid, vehicle to X, a whole lot of other exciting stuff happening in the future. I think if you look at the environmental aspects as well, in terms of, we've got carbon neutrality targets by 2050, we've got Paris Accords, we've got all these promises, and we need to have the mechanisms to actually get us there. And I think from a smart grid perspective, at the end of the day, the customer still wants a pleasant driving experience. Everybody Ubers today. We want sustainable transport. So I think that being said, I have posed a few questions to our panelists. And I think the first one starts off with, which will be directed to you, Jacob, is what are the current scenarios and drivers in the automotive market globally that we are seeing today?
Thank you very much. And I think what we could do is first just separating the classical ICE, so the combustion engine, from everything that's zero emission, and then also structuring this whole thing a bit by the passenger car market and the commercial vehicle market. And in the passenger car market, all this shift is driven by legislation, of course, CO2 targets in North America, in Europe, in China, which is for us always the, let's say, dominant markets, but then they influence also very much what the OEM's portfolio is and what goes in all markets globally. And here we see, lastly, so it's about a year or a bit more than a year, something that people call a fading momentum in the shift to zero-emission mobility. But what I want to express is that this fading momentum means, in fact, a decrease of the speed of the change. So we still have a change. Fading momentum sounds like it's not really happening anymore, but that's not the case. It's happening as before, a very fast shift to zero-emission mobility, just not as quick as it was projected. When you look at the projection from 2023, that would have been corrected downwards in 2024, looking at a 2030 stage. Where it was in the past always different. Yeah? We have always increased our projections. Now this was the first time in 2024 that we actually slightly decreased them. Now how is this composed? Is it now electric or is it fuel cell electric? So battery electric or fuel cell electric? The first recognition from what we have already in the market, which is already in some markets, China especially, the highest share of new vehicle sales, battery electric, so going into the 20%, and are expected to go north of 50% in 2030. Same thing is in Europe. We expect it to go north of 40% in 2030. Only in the US we are now like mitigating a little bit the projections. But these projections actually go mostly for the passenger car sector on battery electric. The people are used to it, it works perfectly fine, charging times are competitive. There's no unmet need for the consumer, except some specific use cases. If you're really living on the countryside, you need to use a pickup truck. That's something that also post-2030 we see being a combustion engine. But there's otherwise, for a normal passenger car, no unmet need. So here we have the battery electric vehicles, and we do not, you definitely get to that, we do not really see, except vehicles being marketed by Hyundai, vehicles being marketed by Toyota, some experiment vehicles being around. We don't really see fuel cell electric vehicles being strong in the passenger car market because of this missing unmet need. All the requirements from the customers to a vehicle are served with battery electric, also range north of 500, 600 kilometers. Now for the truck it's different because, and you have a very nice slide that you're going to show on this, whenever it's super far or it's super heavy, the batteries quickly get to an end, and then they would need to be so large that the locked-in capital in the vehicle gets too high. So we definitely see a bigger powertrain mix in the commercial vehicle sector. We see the same sort of policies that are pushing for zero emission also in even on-road commercial vehicles, but also off-road commercial vehicles. But in terms of powertrain choice, definitely much more diversification for the small ones. They follow the passenger car route. In many companies, they even use the same components. But for everything which is medium duty to heavy duty, we see a mix, and we see definitely the fuel cell having its position. We also see hydrogen combustion being looked at again. And it's maybe the right wording to use that the share for fuel cell EVs in commercial vehicles is a bit depending on how well the battery electric powertrains perform.
Yeah, so I think based on that, what is the latest forecast for BEV demand? You know, I think I'm going to pose this to the panelists. Toby, hopefully you can give me a response on this. What is the reality when we look at, you know, what was predicted previously? I think very bullish predictions versus the reality of the situation. Toby, maybe over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm sure the members of this panel really do want to delve into all of the technology sector and country-specific reasons for the BEV slowdown, not to mention recent geopolitics. But I'd like to just take a moment and step back from the annual volatility and look at the major multi-year trend. Because in my organisation, BSF, we've been remarkably accurate so far at predicting BEV adoption, and we're not following a particularly complicated thesis, so I thought I'd share it here. So the precious metal analysts this morning were all chastised for following the mine production too closely, and I think a similar criticism could be levelled at the automotive analysts who follow OEM production guidance as well. So what a company hopes to make, or maybe even intends to make, and what the market dictates that it must make, are often two separate things. The OEMs have to date followed consumer pressure and government mandates and created a still nascent market for emissions-free vehicles. And over the last 10 years, the sales grew at about 50% per annum on average. And so the prevailing logic became that this was supply constrained rather than demand constrained. And for a very long time, that was true. But what we need to acknowledge is that technology adoption is almost never a simple exponential curve, because customer base is not homogeneous. So at the very minimum, you need to apply what is known as a double S curve, which is because of its shape. When the technology is first introduced, the adoption is low because it needs to go through an advertisement. You need to get the information out there. But once that information exists, and the saturation of that information is relatively high, you start to see a very rapid uptake among what's known as the early adopters. The early adopters is characterized as 1, they're tech savvy, 2, they're reputationally motivated, and most importantly, 3, they're unconstrained financially. So they buy new technology simply because they want it and they think that it will be popular among their peers. Now, the size of this group varies by market and by region, but across the developed nations, it's approximately 10 to 15% of the purchasing population. What happens when most of this group has considered the technology and decided whether to adopt it or ignore it? Well, for the customer base to continue to grow, it has to forge into what's known as the early majority. This group is also tech savvy, and it's also quite motivated to buy, but crucially, they're characterized as having real-world constraints, such as financial limitations. With limitations comes risks. A natural response among most people to risk is to adopt a wait-and-see approach. So bringing it to Africa briefly, if your party needs to swim across a river that might have crocodiles in it, you're probably going to let your friend swim across first. And it's that very human hesitation that leads to a flatlining and overall growth. Okay, so that's the background, that's the history done. What we care about now is where does this go? So the two factors that determine how long you remain in the flatline period are the overall value of risk, which is the cost of your product, right? Which is obviously very high in the case of a car, and the differential of the value proposition versus the available alternatives. And that's the differential between the BEV and the ICE or the hybrid or the FCEV. And this is debatable and is being very loudly debated. Is cheap fuel more important than quick refueling? Do you want a quiet acceleration, or do you want like a nice purr on your Ferrari? Do you care about the low emissions of running a BEV more than you care about the mineral exploitation and needed to make one? So all of these arguments to the forefront and muddying the waters of that value differential. So predicting the rate of resolution for these factors is an art rather than a science, but in my opinion, it should be obvious that this hiatus will be on the longer side versus other technologies that have passed through it, such as mobile phones or automated dishwashers. Cars are a very expensive purchase, and the consequences for choosing the wrong powertrain can extend beyond just suboptimal financial decision and into real-world trouble, like running out of power on a motorway or missing an appointment due to an unpredictable wait time at a charging station. And those are the genuine forces that underpin range anxiety and the infrastructure rollout requirements. Yes, we also have Elon Musk throwing up Roman salutes and inserting himself into elections, but if a consumer is fully resolved to buy electric, then this is going to matter very little other than perhaps their brand choices. So I follow S&P numbers relatively often, and they're currently predicting BEV penetration rate in 2030 of about 32%, which I think is quite a nice number, and I generally agree with it. It certainly seems more realistic than the 42% they had just a couple of years ago. But the problem I have with the profile of all of these forecasts is that they are invariably a nice, smooth exponential curve, and I would argue that the next 1 to 2 years at a minimum will continue to be marked by this flat market share for BEVs, which is a major underperformance versus the expectations of a lot of the OEMs. And so it will actually be more like 2027 that we see another very rapid up in adoption. So to sum up, just what has been quite an abstract argument to a simple question, just to say, I think the current situation is a bit of a reprieve. It's a medium-term reprieve for the PGM market, so we still need to be disciplined and understand that PGM demand for automotive is not an everlasting well, but it should be relatively persistent.
Okay, thank you. Anton, from a OEM perspective, from Toyota, what do you guys see? I mean, you guys have entered this market, especially earlier than most people. What is the reason for the slowdown on BEV demand, according to you?
Okay, so I think, Toby, you did a good job in explaining some of the trends and how the customers perceive the product. But contrary to what people think, the battery electric customer is now a customer that's driven by value. It's not per se a green customer. So when I'm saying value, it means the cost parity. And there is still not cost parity without incentives. You see it in South Africa where we don't have a massive market because we don't have incentives. So that cost parity, the customers, they actually worry about 3 things: the range, the recharge, how long it takes to recharge, and then resale. So that's the one thing that nobody has mentioned so far. So to those that are not aware, the resale value of electric vehicles is a massive problem. To give you an idea, in the United States, the resale value of an electric vehicle is about 50% after 1 year. And it's not because it's a bad product after 1 year. It has everything to do with how the policies has shaped the behavior to continuously buy new vehicles, and after a year to get the same incentive on your company tax, you need to sell that vehicle off and buy another one. That's the one side. And then the other side of it is there's an American EV manufacturer that starts with a T. I'm not going to mention their name. Yeah, there's a Adolf Hitler that runs that company, and he has. They dropped the list pricing by 20% in 1 year. Now, if you're in a vehicle, a new vehicle, and the list pricing is dropped by 20%, effectively, you are sitting with a massive loss after 1 year. So that was what was contributing, and the sustainable factors of why people drive cars, it's no more there anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. But I think, just to add to that, I mean, we've seen some of the big Chinese brands coming into the country. And I think you get high-end Chinese products and you get the lower-end products. And from a price perspective, it's changed the narrative where your electric vehicles were above 1.5 million rand. And I mean, you're looking at similar ranges. That's now come down to the low 600,000s. It's still not there yet, but I think with a little push or maybe policy reform, we could actually have higher adaptation. How do you guys see that? Thanks for reminding me of something that I should have said. So the other side of this, if we talk about the Far East competitors coming into the market, I think it was said at the conference last year that the trade protectionism from the European Union and from the Americans, that has kicked in. Country of origin is a definite reality. And we will see how the market reacts to that based on price, because now they're making the Chinese product unpopular, and whether that product will now be flooded into non-protected markets. We will see what that does. 100%.
But he also last year promised me a battery electric vehicle Prado by now. I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
Yeah, the range is not up to scratch.
Especially not Prado, right?
Exactly,
yeah. Okay, so this is to our gentleman online, Bernard. What are the latest projections for demand of ICE, hybrid and plug-in hybrids? And how is this, with regard to platinum production? How is it related? How do you see that?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, my predecessors here in this panel, they said a lot of very wise words. And I was first, while listening, especially to Toby, I had the feeling, wow, I'm probably the only one who is defending the ICE here, and Toby is going to defend the battery electric vehicle, which felt a little bit like very good for Umicore, because we invested so heavily in battery electric vehicle, and now the market is not coming. And actually, yes, indeed, I think the market is really not coming so strongly on battery electric vehicle. It sticks very strongly with the ICE. So what we reasonably think is that so in 2023 we had probably worldwide ICE vehicles. ICE means passenger cars, means light duty vehicle, but means also heavy duty vehicles. So everything what really has a really nice combustion engine in it, and it has some emissions to be cleaned, but is still on the road. So, speaking of ships and all this kind of stuff, or off-road heavy duty, of 82 million pieces or cars or whatever, trucks, or what you like. So ICE alone, 82 million. We now think, and we thought last year, we thought that this goes down by 2028. I don't want to really lean out at the moment further than 2028, down to some 64 million. This was too, let's say, pessimistic when it comes to ICE. We revised this because of the slowdown in EV, and also because battery electric vehicles with some range extenders, but also the plug-in hybrids, they are also ICE to some extent. So we revised this now up from this 82 million in 2023 as the peak time to 70 million in 2028. So a much smaller decline internal combustion engines when you take into account all of them. It's true, a lot is thanks to kind of more new technologies which the consumers like a lot, like the plug-in hybrids, which was said some years ago that this is only an interim technology on the way to pure electric. Seems to be more sticky again than people had projected. What does this mean now for our PGMs? Now, also there, PGMs are needed longer and more than said last year or the year before, many analysts had projected. We also assume that also Palladium stays in a quite strong position because the gasoline powertrain stays the dominant one over the next years, and even when you have now the tri-metal or multi-metal catalysts, the majority of these catalysts is still built with a lot of palladium in it. So stronger for longer on the need for the PGMs on a little bit more similar level like we have it today. Perhaps two other elements to add to that one. So we spoke in, what was it, 2022 about the end of the ice in 2035 in Europe. Now the latest news, and I'm not sure if you in the room have seen this, but there are some leaks out of what Brussels is currently debating internally. So the administration of Ursula von der Leyen sounds like they are now ready, and I say already because I predicted this already for some years, but now they are even faster than I had expected it, that they will completely scrap that 2035 story. So they are now already working on the wording for that one, which again shows only that also internal combustion engine is there a longer lifetime. The Chinese, okay, they go stronger for batteries, but on the other side, they will also stronger go for real emission control on their ICE, which they bring on the market. So also there I expect a bit of a more demand, even kind of coming back, not because of more ICE vehicles getting on the market than now, but because of better working catalysts. So
yeah, no, okay.
I'm a bit the bullish guy here in this room, seems on PGMs.
Thank you. Thank you. Toby, do you want to perhaps maybe add a little bit, if you can, on that question?
I think we could also just bring in something that's extremely topical, which is what's going on with the automotive industry in the US, right? So when we think about these numbers, we can't just pick the integrator, we have to look at the denominator as well. And for the total population of cars in the US is now at risk of being lower over the next, call it 1 to 2 years, just because of the tariffs that have come in, which will likely feed through to end consumer prices and therefore drive down total sales, which means that more people will hold their cars for longer and wait until the situation right-sizes itself to some extent. The US is an area where the ICE is very strong, right? So anything that is harmful to the US consumer market is bad for overall projections of the ICE, whereas of course China is not raising tariffs on BEVs, it grows its own BEVs, so it doesn't need to raise its prices, and that means that the region that is most all in on the BEV is trucking along, and the one that's the slowest adopter is faltering. So I think we could see maybe a bit of an overall lift to the percentage of BEVs in the next year or two, purely on the basis of a reduced denominator, which is the total vehicle sales. But otherwise, I agree generally with Bernhard's analysis, which is that within the major markets, I think if given the choice, all of the analysis does suggest that there's been a slowdown of adoption expectations. You know, even the younger urban generations are starting to say that they would prefer a hybrid as their next car rather than a full battery electric, which is a major mindset shift. So I think we do somewhat agree. It's sort of a bit of a flatlining. It's a stronger for longer. And then the question will become, what is the next technology shift beyond that? You know, we get even more rapid charging. We have I think Henk mentioned this morning, that we have cars in China that have a 5-minute full recharge time. I mean, that is potentially a game changer, and it does matter how quickly that proliferates out to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Thank you.
Fun fact, by the way, is that the adoption rate on EVs in the US is pretty low, but guess which country is even worse or lower than the US? It is Italy. The Italians seem to dislike battery electric.
Half Ferraris.
Do you want to add?
Yeah. I just want to add to what's been discussed, because for sure there's a slowdown of the projection of uptake of BEVs. So we get more time when we look at this now from a PGM perspective, from a catalytic converter perspective. We get more time for the ICE. We get more time for the catalytic converters, for the markets. But I think worth to add after this conversation so far is that the end game, and I'm perfectly convinced of that, in North America latest, in Europe earlier, in China much earlier, is going to be zero emission, is going to be in the passenger car sector battery electric for ultimately 100%. And in the commercial vehicle industry, we discussed that, it's going to be more diverse. So when we just look at the bookends, one bookend is the history that we could look into, and the other bookend is a full electrified powertrain mix.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, because despite the fact that we see some slowdowns, etc., at the moment, when you really navigate the industry, PGM industry, you would need to also consider that there's this other bookend, later now than what we thought 2 years ago, but it's still there, so we actually need to prepare ourselves and prepare our activities and strategies.
Yeah, but I think obviously there's a place, you know, so for both. So Anton, do you see fuel cell electric vehicles competing directly with battery electric vehicles? You know, especially when you look at, is there a place for it in a different market segment, or, I mean, you guys have started this journey, so
I'm going to give a firm no on that. It doesn't compete. Can I ask the AV team just to put that slide up again? So if you look at this slide, it actually explains what we're talking about. So your vertical axis talks about vehicle size or load. So bigger your vehicle, it goes to the top. And then distance traveled from left to right. You find that your micromobility, your passenger vehicles, like everybody else said, battery electric vehicle, electrons, that will be the most efficient way to transport. But charging time and the weight of the battery, that negates you to look at other types of electrification, like fuel cell electric or hydrogen ICE, that works well on heavy load. So that's where we see each and every type of application being niche and good. And then there's also, beyond this, there's also another layer, which is what resource do you have in your country that is predominant. So we speak to the Brazilians. Their biofuels is massive. I think biofuels takes up 2.5% of their land mass is just making biofuels. And the same is in Indonesia and Thailand. Yes. So it all depends on what feedstock you have available in your country, which will negate to what powertrain you will go. So the ICE engine will be around. I think that's the good news. And also fuel cell will have its place, although to achieve price parity on fuel cell, I think the platinum loading will go down to get price parity on the fuel cell, because that's the current barrier for fuel cell.
Driver.
Yes, the cost driver, that and the cost of the tanks at the moment.
And 100%. So you heard his response. What's abundant?
It's too expensive, Bernard.
So are we going to go for coal-powered steam cars again? We have a lot of coal in the country, right?
You can't bring these Eskom people anywhere near a conversation. I mean, geez.
No, I think the next, in my opinion, the next 5 years is going to really decide which of those paths we're going to take.
Yeah.
I think it's going to come down to adaptation, adopting a specific technology, advocacy around understanding this technology. I think a lot of people still get kilowatt hours and kilowatts mixed up. I think that's quite scary. So I think advocacy around energy, we don't have a finite amount of energy. From a utility perspective, if we had to try to manage the battery electric vehicles that's going to come on our grids, we spoke earlier this morning about 1 megawatt chargers. 1 megawatt charger, that's per vehicle. So you can imagine the impact on the infrastructure. We've got 102 years old, we've got aging infrastructure, we've got infrastructure that's some transformers that are 40 years old. So to be able to adapt to this, we need to find creative ways. And I think hydrogen most definitely plays a part. I think Minister Park spoke about it earlier on this morning. Even though the round-trip efficiencies are terrible, from an engineering perspective, it's still green at the end of the day. So I think we need to look at all of these dynamics, put them together, and plot the best, most strategic path forward. Okay, so I think that's us. We've got a little bit of time for questions.
Yeah, can I bring the conversation then to beyond PGMs, but South Africa? Perhaps we start from a Mackenzie perspective. You're allowed to advise South Africa again, I think, officially. So, if you were to advise South Africa to play in the space, there's the PGM conversation, and that took us to. But what else should South Africa be doing to play in this battery electric vehicle space? And then I'm going to come to the Toyotas who are making cars to export and where that fit in. But Mackenzie perspective, what would you advise South Africa to do?
Thanks for the question. I just read this yesterday night. It was about automotive industry and growth across the markets. And you really see a saturation in North America, in Europe, and in China, in terms of vehicles total, independent of drivetrain. But what we so often have on our charts as rest of world, South Africa, Indonesia, Vietnam, etc., Thailand, all these markets are strongly developing and need production location, need the powertrain mix, need localization. And I believe that there is a potential to actually go also into those industries. And we were discussing with a lot of industry players across Africa, actually, and not talking about Morocco, but about sub-Saharan Africa, about what can be done in terms of battery manufacturing, more coming from the downstream, so coming from the assembly of the products, but then going further and further upstream. And I think it's particularly interesting because it could be a combination of going into the mobility sector, but also going into the stationary sector at the same time. And we see a big shift in chemistries. We go all from this nickel, manganese, cobalt chemistries to iron phosphate combined with manganese. Graphite. And exactly when we combine that with manganese, then you look at the regional infrastructure again. Could be quite interesting to combine the absolute top end, so the raw materials, with what comes downstream in the battery industry.
I have not put him up to say anything good about manganese. It's his own bet. He's saying that on. But Bernard, you guys in that space, you're still in the final phases of moving all your production facilities to China because it is cheaper. So this is the dilemma, as we want car assembly back at home in the US and South Africa. Mining is where the ore bodies are, and the in-between is still moving to China as we speak today, or not so, Bernard?
No, I mean, for us as a catalyst producer and also as a battery materials provider, we go where our customers force us to go, practically. So we need to be close to the car OEMs ultimately. So wherever either ICE or battery electric vehicles are mostly produced, we will be forced to be there. Because, indeed, the minerals are a little bit easier practically in a concentrate form, so as a bullion, as a fine metal. We transport it then, for example, the battery or even just a whole catalytic converter. So, it's a little bit pity for the minerals that they, after beautiful refining, are easier to transport than any in-between product for a car.
It's
So-
actually
Yeah, sure.
one comment on that, because with refining you spark a thought. Yeah, we see the battery value chain. We see an incredible dominance of China when it comes to the raw materials, but it's actually not so much about where the mine is. It's more where the refining happens.
Exactly.
So diversification geoeconomically on the refining locations. That's something where Europe especially is looking for. The US, they have their own way of doing it now. But especially from a European perspective, we're looking at this and saying, okay, we are looking for some diversification in this space. And since this concentration in one market is not about where the mines are, but it's really just the refineries, that's something that can be localized, that can be moved, that can be a sector to be developed.
I do agree, but those are not the businesses that Europe really wants back in their backyards. The permitting problems is holding it up. So the talk is there, but the reality is let the dirty businesses go to China, or not so.
You're connecting to my point. It's very hard to get this permitted in Europe. There's the Raw Material Act that should help a little bit on this, but I fully agree. Therefore, I use the word diversification. Doesn't mean that it needs to go from China to Europe, but it needs to be diversified in order to break the dominance.
Points well made. But Anton, so, I mean, I was reading, I think, that Ford was going to make a fantastic battery electric vehicle, the Ranger, to export to the US, in wherever Ford, Westford in Pretoria. That must not be a nice narrative now. You guys, Toyota is fortunately so flippin' slow in this space that you can't be caught with your pants down because you haven't even got pants on yet. Talk to us about South Africa's role. So are you stepping back into batteries, or your batteries anyway going to come from China via Panasonic in Japan? How's it going to play out? Take us 5 years into the future.
So it's a difficult problem to solve. Your rule of origin plays a massive role in what you produce, because it dictates what you can export and where your value of components is sourced from.
Whose rule is this? Is this a South African export rule? Is this a European rule?
This is
Who
a European
imposes rule of origin?
It's whoever you export to, that specific country, they impose the rule. So we have a free trade agreement with the EU, but it's only on South Africa. It needs a minimum country of origin value within South African components. So if we talk about the battery electric vehicle space, you know, you move into something where more than 60% of the vehicle's value is just the battery. And if you look at the value of the components, I think ultimately you go down to the anode and the cathode layers, you know, the cell composition, that's where the value lies. So then you sit with a scenario to set up a gigafactory for cells. You're betting on a specific technology. You take 3 to 4 years to prep for that plant and whatever, and by the time that plant is live, the technology is already obsolete. So it's a unbearable nightmare. I suppose we need to get better of it, as we need to look at the mining industry. They do investing and turn around better. But look, most of the OEMs are owned by foreign countries, foreign companies. So we get told what to do. We need to motivate what we want to do, and it needs to make business sense. In a lot of times, if their factory that produces the drivetrain is not running yet at scale, it doesn't make sense for them to give that capacity away. And if they've set it up that it's automated, there's no South African way that we can beat that price because it's already automated. So it's a difficult thing. I don't have the answer, but it's definitely to what you were saying, and it's not the beneficiation. I don't understand the chemistry side of it on battery. I think, Bernard, you understand better. Some of it, but it's not just about, you know, people think it's minerals and mixing and it's beneficiated. It's about growing crystals and things like spherical coated graphite, real niche proprietary technologies that makes the improvement on energy efficiency. So Yeah, I'm not sure if you can just say throw research at it and it's all sorted, because you need to still commercialize that research, which is another problem. You need big companies doing the research and commercializing it. And I'm not sure the OEMs per se, the traditional OEMs are going to do it, because they first have to look at their country of origin where they have the proprietary technology.
So I'm trying to bring this all back to South Africa. So we must mine our PGMs very efficiently, and we must export it to these clever people who know what to do with it. Is that where you're landing? In other words, China.
Yeah, no, actually to Japan. You must export it to Japan, not to China.
Yeah. The PGM, some of it still, good point. For you, Japan.
Yeah, so, but look, last thing I just want to say.
This is not what the minister wants to hear.
No,
Where's Parkstow's team? Where is he now?
So I don't want to be earlier like Piet Krookramp, not answering your question. What we can do in South Africa, what we can focus on, is at least having a domestic market on a new energy drivetrain to have enough scale volume that you can also export. So we're trying to grow the domestic market on new energy vehicles, at least so that it makes sense that we can at least do the assembly here.
And there was a question, so unpack it for us. How big is the car market in South Africa? Not what you guys make and export. How many cars do we sell? How many of them are today battery electric vehicles? And what is the projection 5 years out? If you can
Okay, so the car market in South Africa, it's between 500,000 and 550,000 vehicles.
Bought or stolen? Sorry, I was a Toyota question.
Yeah,
Let's move on.
But it's 500,000 vehicles, give or take. So
new cars per year.
New cars per year. Last year, I think we sold, if I'm not mistaken, what was reported at NAMSA, about 1,200 vehicles, and I think there's about another 400 battery electric vehicles added to the 1,200, which wasn't reported at NAMSA by some of the Chinese manufacturers. So it's small. It's 0.5 or 0.3%.
So we are years away from
the local
market.
It is driven by, quite frankly, most of the countries. It's a European 19% tax, or in UK. That's the incentive that pays the customer to pay the vehicle.
Yeah. Now I understand the dynamics, that why it's cheaper still, but so there is no local market of it to speak.
And at best, Bernard, it's going to get to our estimate by 2030 in South Africa, between 5 and 10%, what we can see, based on price. Unless, as soon as there is money to pay for, then it will change the picture. And then the other flip of the coin is we have a much bigger light commercial vehicle mix, and then, that's what negates it.
Gentlemen, I have taken the conversation away from but only ICE and battery electric vehicles to try and bring it back to a South African relevance. I want to thank you all. I think from early this morning there's been consensus that the slower rate of adoption, but it is still growing, the battery electric vehicle, the slower rate buys some time for platinum, palladium. As South Africa is a major producer, what do we do with that time? We heard this morning that some of that should go into market development, into jewelry, into build the market for industrial use and lose the dependency on the exhaust pipes of internal combustion engines. And certainly, I think that's what we'll be talking about further on. But thank you. I wish I was a gold miner again. That was so simple. You mine the shit, you sell the shit, you tell your shareholders you're going to mine more shit at a lower price. What? This is complicated. Thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate all of your inputs. Thank you. Thank you. My Prado is never going to have a battery in, damn it. Ach nee, man, Anton. Come on. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to take a quick break. After the break, we're going to hear from Nornickel Norelsis Platinum Center more about palladium, and then we're going to talk about all the future uses of platinum and investors. Let's take a 29-minute tea break, please.